Welcome to Level 1 Grammar, PPP with Level 1 at AEI. So I want to walk you through the course goals as well as the course objectives and the specific student learning outcomes for grammar. We'll look at how PPP works. I'll give you an example of what should be written on the board, a sample lesson plan, and then we'll finish off. Then I hope to provide a series of these videos for the other levels as well. But let's just start with level 1. First of all, our course goal for level 1 is to expose beginner language learners to the foundational skills of English. This includes reading, writing, speaking, listening, and grammar skills plus vocabulary. This presentation is just focused on the grammar skills. The course objectives for beginner students to develop basic skills in these different areas of the English language. And so instruction includes comprehension of simple reading passages and the application of the new vocabulary for level 1, composing short, simple sentences with the to be verb and simple verb tense usage, as well as comprehension of simple questions and articulation of correct responses. And most importantly, for our grammar lessons, the different parts of speech, use of to be, and simple basic tenses. Specifically for the grammar learning outcomes, a student ought to be able to 1. Recognize the basic parts of speech. This includes nouns, pronouns, verbs, adjectives, adverbs, and prepositions. Interjections and the other parts of speech will be covered in the course, but you should definitely be able to recognize those primarily at the end of the course. Secondly, a student ought to be able to recognize and apply singular, plural, and possessive pronouns. Thirdly, by the end of the course, a student ought to be able to identify the different forms and usage of simple verb tenses and structures using present, present progressive, and past tense. Fourthly, a student ought to be able to identify and demonstrate knowledge of time expressions, specifically every day, right now, and ago, as in a few days ago, a month ago, a week ago, etc. Last, all beginner level students ought to be able to correct grammatical errors at a beginner level of proficiency regarding those previous student learning outcomes. So what does this mean in terms of how we're going to teach the grammar from our level 1 basic English grammar textbook? The Pearson book, the red one here, 4th edition is what I have right here in my hands. You may or may not have the 5th edition in your hands, but this Azar textbook and its companions, the Fundamentals of English Grammar in gray, and then the Understanding and Using English Grammar in blue. Each of these textbooks makes up our entire grammar curriculum. So Azar is really important to us, and we don't want to do nothing but workbook all day long. We want to give students a chance to authentically produce English speech and writing as much of the time as possible. And that's why we use PPP, presentation, practice, and production. So first off, presentation. In the actual classroom setting, online or on campus, presentation of a grammatical rule, a writing idea, or the 5-step writing process, any of the listening or speaking skills, the presentation of those skills should use 75% instructor talk time and ideally 25% student talk time. The instructor would provide the grammar rule, for example, with the formula, definition, and explanation. And I'll go into detail what that looks like. Then the instructor should provide numerous examples and elicit student repetition. So during presentation, you should be like, so we would have example, and then you want the students to repeat that example with you. You will focus during this time primarily on accuracy, correct grammar, more than anything. That's about 10 minutes of class. The next 15 minutes or so of class should be practice time, during which the instructor speaks maybe 40% of the time and the students 60% of the time, ideally. Here we should see the students working in pairs and small groups while the instructor goes from pair to pair or group to group, again, focusing on accuracy by correcting their use of the grammar structure. The last 15 to 20 minutes of class is all about student production, and the student should be speaking the vast majority of the time for the last 15, 20 minutes of class. At least 90% is what we're aiming for. Students will be producing their answers in large group or individually, and they'll be correcting each other ideally, and the instructor should encourage that behavior. Focus here now on fluency more than grammatically correct structure. You want it to be at least functionally clear what they mean. They should be able to mutually understand each other. You should be able to understand them more or less, and they should be able to understand you as well. So an example of the presentation, what I would be writing on the board for a level 1 class, if I'm introducing the use of singular nouns plus be, I'll put up on the board probably the page number and the number for the chart. So this could be on a whiteboard on a Zoom lesson. This could be the whiteboard on campus physically behind you. This could also be, you could use slides on a PowerPoint to present this information, a video to present this. Whatever it is you're using as your mode of presentation, you need to make sure to include these important pieces in your presentation. The title of the rule. What is the name of the rule? What is the number of the chart? What page number did you get it from? The formula. So in this case, the chart that I've pulled this from is 1.3 regarding the use of singular nouns plus be. I left off the page number. You should not. But 1.3, it's actually on page 6 of your textbook. And you can refer to this chart on My English Lab as well in the Pearson website. So they have noun plus is plus noun, but they left off what's going to be really important to our learners, and they're going to notice almost immediately, is the use of the article a and an. That's what they're trying to elicit in this lesson. So Canada is a country is the first example. The second example is Bali is an island. So the two formulas I would give that would go with this chart in my presentation would include noun plus is plus a plus the second noun, and noun plus is plus an plus the second noun. And then I would write out the rule. Singular nouns use singular verbs, use a or an before the second noun. And I would explain this by saying that A is for nouns that start with consonants as well as the consonant sounds of U and Y. An is for nouns that start with A, E, I, and O, most commonly. So some examples, numerous examples are always the goal here. Canada is a country. Bali is an island. Arabic is a language. Beijing is a city. Maria is a girl. Tom is a boy. Babar is an elephant. So that would be the presentation process. You'd go through that, you'd go through the examples, encouraging student participation in the classroom or during the lesson if you're on Zoom. Now, the lesson plan I would follow for this textbook, for this particular chart, is I would start my class with a 5-minute warm-up exercise. They actually give us a little warm-up exercise at the beginning of each grammar lesson in the grammar books. You except for level 8, but don't worry about that if you're teaching level 1. This particular one is exercise 10, page 5, and you could do it as a large group practice exercise just to get everybody sort of guessing. Okay, the first one says, number 1, Canada is a country. Yes or no? Is that true? Yes, Canada is a country, and you would try to get the students to respond and do that for each of the other questions in this exercise. Spend about 10 minutes presenting all of the information in the grammar chart on page 6. And then after you've given the presentation, you want to do at least 10 minutes of small groups or pair work. I've actually divided for this particular lesson a small groups, maybe groups of 4 to 3 for exercise 11, and then specifically pair work for exercise 12 because it's this chart. And they might end up, you could do it either way. Work in small groups, work in pairs, however is appropriate. For exercise 11, they just have to choose the correct article. But for exercise 12, they're working from a word box and sorting these words into countries, languages, cities, islands. But part 2, and this is the part that I would have the pairs present to the class for the last 15 minutes, is part 2 of this exercise 12. In small groups, create sentences. For example, they give France and Japanese. Student A would say France is a country, and student B would have to say Japanese is a language. At this point, the teacher can work on aiding students with their pronunciation and just making sure that they're getting, the right categories. Is France a language? No, French is a language. Something along those lines. All right, that's the end of my sample lesson plan. You could wrap up the class by referring them to my English lab, or alternatively, another way to do exercises during class is to take the students to the computer lab, if you're on campus, to do exercises in my English lab. Or alternatively, you can, as a class online on Zoom, actually go do my English lab together. Additionally, you could, in the classroom building, use your television in your classroom to project those exercises from my English lab on screen. So these are all options. Please feel free, again, ask me any questions. We have a number of other grammar resources outside of the textbooks and the associated textbook website. Please let me know, and I'll see you in the next lesson.